Now this was the most controversial set of videos I have ever made. I published a series of videos on the channel and got a series of negative comments against those videos. Something I've never really seen before. But before we get into that, I just want to go over channel blocking. Now, as you guys know, I am fairly fair when it comes to taking criticism. If I've got something wrong or somebody has an adverse comment against something I've said on the channel, but they've made a well-argued point of view, then I'm actually quite open to having that comment published on the channel, because it proves that I'm listening to you guys when I get things wrong or things you don't agree with. But I'm afraid I do draw the line, and I've said this many times on the channel before, at people downright swearing and using foul language in the comments. I'm afraid if you do that, the reality is you're just going to get blocked from the channel. Apart from the fact other people don't want to read people just going off on a swearing rant. It's as simple as that. It doesn't do the channel any good. It doesn't do the channel stats any good. And it's got no place actually if there's no reasoned argument. If you make a reasoned argument and you keep the language civil, fair enough. So, because of your language and the fact you put everything in capitals, Electric Eddie, you're fired. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. So the three of you that watch the channel, I know there's more of you that do watch the channel, but some months ago, as you probably well know, I was lent Korg Poly 61 so that I could do some videos for the channel. And you know, to be honest, I had very little experience of the Korg Poly 61. It wasn't something that was on my bucket list at this point in time. But I did the videos, and I had to do the videos very quickly. And I did all these videos some months ago, and I've only just got round to doing the post-production and editing and publishing. So they went up on the channel. But the comments that I received, the negativity against these particular videos, I've never seen that sort of negativity against videos before. It's the first time. So I've never published a set of videos that's provoked such an emotion. I even had one tuber tell me that they were unsubscribing from the channel. Now, you know, at the end of the day, whether you subscribe to the channel or you don't subscribe to the channel, that really is purely your choice. I prefer that more of you subscribed to the channel and came back and looked at the content that was being published. But hey ho, it's personal preference. It's personal preference whether you subscribe to the channel, and it's personal preference whether you want to support the channel through the channels like Patreon. But when I sit down and make a video, I do my best to represent the topic fairly. I do research where required and make it clear that the views I'm expressing are my views and not the views of somebody else. And that's very important because they are my views. Okay, it's not something I've cloned from somebody else. I've made a rational argument, and that's where I come down to land. However, in this instance, I have to make an apology. I didn't really have enough time with the Korg Poly 61, which was a result of a number of circumstances that were beyond my control. One of which was the fact that I've, over the course of this year, been ill on numerous occasions following something or other. In the summer I was ill, again I was ill in September, and every time it's floored me for weeks. So that was one of the issues. And the other fact was I was told by the instrument owner that he'd unexpectedly sold the instrument. Now that doesn't sound right, so I'll just rephrase that. What I mean is, when I borrowed the instrument, I knew it was up for sale, and it had been up for sale for quite some time. However, as soon as I borrowed it, it seems within a week or so of me borrowing it, the owner had sold it. So I'd turn around and say it was beyond my control. It was kind of beyond my control, but I was on a limited time frame anyway. So what I tried to do in the limited time I had was shoot some stock footage, normally referred to in the industry as B-roll, I believe, and other footage which I hope I could make with a commentary into some videos. Actually, as it turned out, when I went through what I shot, and I shot a lot more than actually what you will have seen in these videos. I shot a lot more, but there was actually enough material to make 3 reasonable 10 to 15 minute videos about this particular keyboard. So that was kind of what I was aiming for in the first place, to have a few 10 to 15 minute videos. And when I looked at the videos prior to publishing, while I have to admit not my greatest work because it was rushed, I thought I'd done a reasonable job of actually imparting my views on the Korg Poly 61. It looks like, unfortunately, that other people had very, very different views and opposing views to the comments that I made and the sounds that came out of the synthesizer when I was playing the keys. How could you make a synth like that sound so S***T? I apologise, that's part of the reason why I haven't been making videos, because I keep running out of breath. But that was a comment that was left. The problem is, I now go back and look at the synth to understand if it was me or if it was the patches, and was the machine at factory stock, or whether there was an issue with what was loaded on the machine. Now, when I buy a synth, and that synth is mine, what I would normally do is work out how to put the synth back to factory. It's one of the first things I do with these synthesizers before I shoot any footage. Why do I do that? Well, there's a very simple reason. I do not know whether the person who owned that synth before me was a genius or a lunatic. Okay, and I sort of say that tongue in cheek. But they could have made changes to the synth that makes it very difficult, or makes it act in weird and funky ways. So I always try to put it back so it's got the factory patches and the factory operating parameters reset. In the past, I've spent days, and I literally mean days, trying to understand why the synthesizer will not do something that I know it can do, only to find out that somebody has changed a setting on that synthesizer, and once I put it back to factory, lo and behold, everything works as expected. That is just the way of the world. So I now have a policy that when I get a synth, yes, I play around with it as soon as I get it, but reality is I find out very quickly how to reset it to factory, and I start afresh on that box and say, okay, what went before went before. Now, this wasn't my synth, okay, and I have to respect that it was somebody else's property. Now, I'm not saying that's degraded my view of the synthesizer, but it might have added to the negativity. Other people in comments have described a synth with quality pads, strings, brasses, and I was not hearing these lush sounds that others were describing to me in the comments that I received. As I said, this was not my synth, and I was assuming that the tones stored in the synth were normal. But the fact that I was not hearing this, maybe this was a wrong assumption. Another comment I had was, you kept the synth in mono while demoing it. If the synth was in mono, it was because the patch that I selected put the synth into that mono parameter. I wouldn't have changed it. I would have just selected the synth and selected the patch, and it would have then selected the whether it was a poly, unison, or mono mode. Whether that was correct or not, I don't know, and I can't obviously tell you now because I don't have the synth. But the bottom line is I didn't have enough time with this synth, and I'm genuinely taken aback with the number of negative comments that people put against these videos. Now I'm going to make a couple of comments here that may not sit very well with some of you, and I do apologise, but I'm still going to make them. This synth was designed pre-MIDI, and the MIDI in the model I had was a retrofit. It may have been done at the factory, but it was a retrofit. It wasn't the standard. It was put into the synth because of the MIDI 1.0 ratification to make it a MIDI-able device. The bottom line with MIDI on this device is it was particularly poor, and that's not surprising. And it was rushed. The MIDI implementation was rushed, okay, to give it MIDI for the market, given that 1.0 had just been ratified. I understand the implementation in the latter model was better because it was actually designed to be MIDI-able. But this model I had was basic as you could have got. I've been accused by laughing about this on the video, and I probably was laughing and chuckling, but that wasn't laughing at the MIDI per se. It was said in a jovial way because the understanding was it was basic because of where the synth was released and where MIDI 1.0 was ratified. 2, I may have made this sound awful, as many have stated. This seems to be a very coveted synth, more coveted than I seem to have thought at the time. I have no idea whether the version that I had was stock or buggered, and I really do mean that, because looking back, the tones that I was generating were the tones that were stored in the synth. It wasn't mine, and I had to work with what I had. It's obvious that the tones played were not the tones that people remembered, and I can only say I'm sorry for that, but they were the patches that seemed to be in there. And in fact, when I went through the list of patches and I played some of those patches, they didn't sound like the patch names, which would seem to indicate that this synth was not at stock. The user interface on the device, while usable, was basic, and the scope for manipulation of sounds was limited, so I don't detract from that. Now, many have said, oh, you can program, and it is programmable. I mean, I'm not going to deny that, but the reality is the interface was more basic than some of the other dual digital oscillator synths that were around at the time, but it seemed to have been loved. Look, the bottom line is very simple. I needed to do better. I've taken your comments on board for the next box I review, and I'm not sure what that box is going to be. I've got several sitting here that probably will become the next box to be reviewed, but they are my synths and they will be reset to factory, whereas this Korg Poly 61, the more I look back at it, the more I'm convinced that the tones that were stored in it, A, were not factory, and B, were not the lush tones that so many of you had told me this machine can make. Until next time, live long and prosper. Bye bye.